same Mets game that I was at with my family during Passover, you would think that the entire stadium was Jewish. You wouldn't imagine that we are only 2% of the world's population. And given the ability to have kosher food, including a kosher for Passover bun on a hot dog, you certainly wouldn't think that there are people in this world who don't want us around. In fact, as Tal Keenan writes in his new book, God is in the Crowd, America represents a zenith in Jewish history, at which Jews have achieved numerical concentration unprecedented in the diaspora, financial prosperity, and political power. They enjoy the option of overt, unapologetic Jewish identification that, in their neighbors' eyes, does not negate their Americanism. Or so we thought. Sitting at the ball game last week, proudly a New Yorker, though please don't tell my DC family that, and proudly Jewish, I was thinking about a line in this morning's Torah reading. You shall not copy the practices of the land of Egypt where you dwelt, or of the land of Canaan to which I am taking you, nor shall you follow their laws. My rules alone shall you observe and faithfully follow my laws. I am the Lord your God. Really? Isn't this exactly what I was doing? Trying to find a way to have it all? To sit at a game with my baseball hat on, eating the kosher for Passover hot dog, and simultaneously counting the Omer? So what does this text from our Parsha mean? What does it mean to not copy the practices of the land? How do we understand that today? Are we to remain truly separate or only sort of? First of all, when it comes to laws, we are in fact not supposed to remain completely separate. We are supposed to stop at stop signs. We are supposed to pay our taxes. We are supposed to get vaccinated. This is known as Dina de Malchuta Dina. The law of the land is the law. What is interesting about this, the Dina, it's the only extraneous element that was incorporated into a halachic law structure. This statement, Dina de Malchuta Dina, appears 4 times in the Babylonian Talmud and is a nod to Jewish acquiescence of a non-Jewish authority. But we must then ask, is there a difference between law and culture? For example, can we continue to follow the law and be proudly Jewish? Well, of course we can. What this could mean is we take a standardized test on a Sunday, not a Saturday. We leave work early on Friday, even if that means we stay late on a Monday. How do we live simultaneously in both worlds, and do we lose anything when we do? Rabbi Brad Artson, in thinking about this passage, said, the guiding assumption of this passage is that we are tempted to become like the people with whom we live. So there is a need to speak out against this all too natural impulse. Why? Because one cannot blindly adopt the standards of other people and simultaneously remain true to the values of Torah and rabbinic traditions. He says you cannot serve 2 masters. Or can we? Is the condemnation of assimilation really that sweeping? Isn't it possible to learn, albeit selectively, from the accumulating wisdom of human experience, science, and insight? 2 medieval interpreters do read the verse in a more restricted light. Rashi understands this verse as applying only to the Egyptians and the Canaanites, who were more corrupt than all the other nations. Abraham ibn Ezra, a 12th century commentator from Spain, explains that this stricture applies only to the Egyptian legal system. Both of these sages perceive that there is much to be learned from the wisdom of our non-Jewish neighbors. Not only in the realm of science, but in human relations, Jewish traditions have always been open to the insights of other people. The key, both to this Torah verse and to later interpretations, lies in the final phrase. Those non-Jewish practices and insights which strengthen Jewish survival, which sensitize us as a people, which teach us how to be more loving, more caring, more sensitive, which prompt us to understand more about Judaism and to practice it more fully, those pose no threat to our Jewishness. On the contrary, maybe we benefit from their inclusion. An openness to learn, however, should not be mistaken for the blind adoption of all non-Jewish standards. Torah and later traditions stand as the ultimate counterculture, opposing all that which would cheapen human life or reduce our consciousness of the holy. So maybe what we're being taught to do is not to become like the other, but to bring our culture to the larger one in which we live. This past week, I was invited to a conference housed at the United Nations called a Conference for Responsible Leadership. The opening session was moderated by David Gregory and had Senator Joe Lieberman as a panelist. And this first session was focused on restoring civility to public discourse. Senator Lieberman said, "How did we get here? Why are there such challenges today?" He posited that speech and communication are the critical element. Our politics and our leadership has become a divided triangle. What was spirited politics has become political war, and that speech has become a weapon. It's used harshly and without standards of what is acceptable. It's become commonplace for people to not just attack ideas, but to attack people personally. He said this isn't just because of one thing, it could be many. He wonders, maybe people just aren't as interested in getting things done. Maybe the problem is that the amount of money spent on politics is now about political victory, not about communal progress. That we have sadly shifted from criticizing ideas to calling people evil. And the way we speak affects everything. But here was what was incredible. I'm sitting there in the UN, and Senator Joe Lieberman, an Orthodox Jew, is speaking and sharing that the higher you go as a leader, the more responsible your leadership should be. And what did he do to prove it? He brought in Moses. Our Moses! He brought our Torah, our story, to make the point. He said that Moses didn't get into the land of Israel because of his mistake. And then he continued. In speaking about civil discourse, he shared a famous Hasidic story about a woman who was a gossip who went to a rabbi for advice. While the details aren't even important to this moment, what's relevant is that in this day, in this age, in the UN, here in New York City, our tradition, Jewish culture, Jewish teaching was invoked. So where does that leave us? How do we engage with who is around us and remain proudly Jewish? First, we need to look at current events and know that unfortunately, no matter how much we feel at home, we need to remember who we are. We need to remember that there has sadly been an uptick in anti-Semitism, and yet again, just last Saturday, we saw how hate has infiltrated our communities. Maybe it's our destiny to be a little bit apart. As Tal Keenan wrote, the Nazis themselves were irrelevant, a generic malevolence interchangeable with the mods of the Iraqi Farhud, the Cossacks, the Inquisitors, the Crusaders, and dozens of hostile majorities within which the Jews have lived over the past 19 centuries. They have all come and gone. It was a community in the background that was relevant. As its tormentors replaced one after another over the centuries, the Jewish community has remained constant. He continued, if my American identity was forcibly revoked, as my grandfather's German nationality had been, Jew would remain my only affiliation, the affiliation that history has never allowed us to shed. So as we recognize our distinctiveness, we must remain a part of the conversation. This week's Parsha is called Acharei Mot, after the death. It is about the death of Aaron's sons. They still find a way to go on, to engage, albeit scarred. This is what we need to do. We need to know where we are bruised, and then we need to get up and live. We need to do what the rabbi in Poway, California is doing. We need to do what Abe Foxman said here this past Wednesday night at our Yom HaShoah observance. We need to speak up for us, and we need to speak out against hate whenever we see it, whoever are the victims.